Hello and welcome to the Pre-Shift Podcast, the show featuring real restaurant people, real stories, and real advice to build high-performing teams. I'm DJ Costantino and I'll be your host, and have a different kind of episode for you today. I recently had the pleasure of joining in on a live discussion about strategies for thriving in our industry, on the employee front and on the guest front. I chatted with Eric Cacciatorre from the Restaurant Unstoppable podcast and James Schonzeit from Square for Restaurants about everything from staff retention to kiosk ordering, and shared some insights from our recent industry report. It was a conversation jam-packed with practical and actionable tips for restaurant operators, and I want to share it with you all. So for this week's episode, here's our full, unedited live conversation. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did.
Hey everybody, I'm James. I lead design for food and beverage at Square. I was talking about how, you're probably familiar with Square at this point, but maybe think of the little white reader that you would see at the farmer's market, or the white stand that swivels around in a coffee shop with the big blue tip buttons. Honestly, what a lot of folks in the industry still don't realize is that we're one of the largest restaurant technology platforms in the world. So yes, it's super easy for a coffee shop to buy an iPad, get up and running in a day, but we have everything from combos for franchises to courses for full service. We got teams of folks looking at the back of house. Your back office team needs to hopefully make money in this business where it's very hard to make money. So a big part of my job, honestly, and what my design team at Square is responsible for, is making sure that when we build something new, that when y'all use it, your staff is using this, your guests are interacting with it, the reaction is hopefully, someone in the industry had a hand in this, as opposed to the opposite, which is, has anyone at Square ever set foot? And in my opinion, we're going to talk a bit about technology today, not all about tech, but that's one of the big things that, in my opinion, can make technology in a restaurant a good thing or a bad thing. So excited to be here and talk more with you guys.
And I want to vouch for James. We did join 30 minutes early and his microphone was pristine. So that was a freak accident. But we're here, we're making it work. And today we're going to be talking about some really important stuff, things that are critical for all of our restaurants to be successful: staff, customer, and trends. And basically between 7 Shifts and Square, there is a lot of data that you guys are picking up. And between my 1,000 plus conversations with leading restaurateurs across the country and what DJ is doing with his podcast, we're going to really dive in and break this down, share some of that data that we've gotten from 7 Shifts and Square. But specifically, we're going to be talking about restaurant staff. What are they looking at for basically, what are their needs? So what has the data told us about the needs? What have they expressed about their needs? We're going to be talking about what the customers' expectations are as the world evolves, as technology evolves, as customer expectations evolve and get stronger and more opinionative. We're going to share all that data with you and really break it down and talk about what we're learning. And then lastly, we're going to cover trends, ways restaurant owners can automate and leverage technology to make their workers and customers more happy. So let's get into it. Staffing. Labor shortages. This isn't news. For 5-6 years more, it's been harder and harder to get labor, people to come work in our restaurants, and it's only getting more difficult. Wage regulations are also cracking down. Many states, minimum wage $15 or more. It's just getting harder and harder, and the expenses are increasing, and it's one of the biggest challenges for restaurant owners. So with all the data that you have, what is it telling us about how to attract and retain employees? Who wants to take it? James or DJ?
I think I can take this one. Yeah, absolutely. So, it's not surprising that operators are citing some of their biggest challenges right now are hiring and, more importantly, retaining the staff that they already have. And last year we did a survey. We asked operators their biggest challenge. Those were number 1 and number 2 by a large margin. And this year we really wanted to learn, not only about, those challenges, but we wanted to see how can we address those challenges? What information can we gather to better understand the needs of restaurant employees? So what we did was partner with a survey vendor, and we surveyed independently 1,500 restaurant employees in North America. And we just wanted to find out as much as we could, everything, why they quit their jobs, when they quit, where do they go, what kind of benefits do they want, what kind of training do they like? And I think what we came up with is a pretty nice rounded report about what employees truly want out of restaurant work in 2024.
Yeah. And I can support a lot of what you're sharing. One of the questions I asked all my guests for the longest time is, what is your biggest challenge? Flat out, what is your biggest challenge? The number one answer, 90% of the time or more, was hiring, staffing. So much so that I removed the question from the podcast because we already knew what the answer was. So yeah, 100%. And did I cut you short, DJ?
No. I appreciate the insight, and just like learning from the field and understanding that's what people like. To the point you said, you don't have to ask anymore because you already know what the answer is going to be. It's pretty clear what's the big challenges are. So we don't need to talk about the challenges anymore. We know what they are, but what can we do about them, right? How can we solve them? And one of the big insights we took away here as well, restaurants are a transitory industry. A lot of people work them when they're young, when they're in school or when they're pursuing other things. But more than half the time when someone leaves a restaurant job, they're going to work for another restaurant. So that just kind of shows you that, maybe you do lose people to other pursuits, but more than half the time you are losing them to another restaurant. So what can you do about that? Well, we can dive in and understand what the reasons are. Why are they leaving? And that's still on the previous slide there. The first one, more than half the time, is going to be pay. You're going to lose people if someone down the block is going to be paying more. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about that, but sometimes there are. But I think more importantly, what we understand here beyond that is almost half, 46% of people cite bad managers as the reason that they leave. And that is very much within the control of a restaurant owner.
Yeah. There's this quote echoing in my head right now, listening to you talk, and it's, people don't work for restaurants. They work for people. 100%. Brands can be sexy. They can attract people on, people like, brand awareness. But at the end of the day, once they get through that front door, it's about the relationships and who you're working for. And again, you don't work for restaurants, you work for people. I'm sure you can back that up. What are you thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it comes down to. It's they're not always trying to move on from your restaurant, but maybe half the time it's the management that they're leaving from. Maybe their manager aren't giving them enough recognition, enough training. Maybe they're scheduling poorly. Actually, one of the interesting other stats that we found was, let me make sure I get the number right here. More than half, so 58% of employees said that the flexible hours are the reason that they choose the industry. And if a manager who can control the schedule, they effectively control the restaurant with that schedule, are not giving employees what they need when it comes to their hours, then that can be a huge factor there. One restaurateur that we just had on our podcast named Mike Bausch. He runs Andolini's out in Tulsa.
Mike,
12 restaurant pizza mini empire over there. He calls it scheduling with empathy. Right? It's like you have the schedule, you have your business needs, but you also have to understand that people have lives outside of their job. And it's not the typical 9 to 5 where you can build your life easily. You know what that schedule is going to be. It may be different all the time, week to week. So
you have to accept no one's going to love your restaurant as much as you do. It's not going to happen. Right. So, one other thing that comes to my mind too is that when you take on this mindset of knowing that nobody's ever going to love your restaurant as much as you, and you really make it about pushing people out of your restaurant, like counterintuitive, like it's so hard to get them, but once they come to you, like how do you help them go to where they want to be? And when you take that mindset, it's not about me, it's about you, they tend to never leave. It's like you almost have to take a counterintuitive approach.
Yeah, exactly. And also in the survey we wanted to understand how long people want to stay in the industry and how they see their careers. And many people do view this as a long-term career. They don't want to just do this for a little bit. They want to grow and they want to become managers. They want to own their own restaurants. And it's super important that restaurant owners and people in charge of people at restaurants, create these viable career paths. Maybe it's training, upskilling, promotions, learning about them and growing with them, rather than having to constantly fill shifts with new folks. And at that point you're kind of just on the treadmill, right? You're never growing because the people aren't growing, and that's how you grow.
Right. James, your mic is muted. I didn't know if you want to join weigh in. I know you're here to really focus on the consumer side of things, but any thoughts?
No, my big takeaway here is it's probably not a surprise that low pay came up first, right? Like that's something the industry has struggled with for a very long time. But I think it's like, what do you do about that, right? It's like your prime costs are what they are. It's getting worse, honestly, right? With inflation. So you're getting pressure on both ends. And where are things going to break, right? And that's, people are experimenting with all different kinds of things. Of course, there's all the stuff around tipping, service charges. But then also, what we can talk about too is like the role that technology plays in that too, right? You move to handhelds, right? So you can take orders at the table. So you can have one server covering a bigger section, and then maybe they're taking home a little more at the end of the night. You bring in a kiosk so that you only have have to have one cashier up at once or something, and maybe the tipped house is a little bigger than what it would be otherwise. But that's the big thing there, and the reality is that the way the business model works today is it's hard to move that. But hopefully, there are things that we can do, and we can talk about more in a bit on how to do that. We all know, right?
Yeah. Before we shift to the focus to consumers, DJ, did you want to talk about how technology can help serve staff better? I mean, did you want to just bring anything to the surface before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the reasons that people leave, the things that people need from training, a lot of that can be solved through technology, right? Particularly with scheduling. That's what we work to do here at 7 Shifts. That's our chief mission, is to make scheduling better and easier for operators and more efficient, right? So being able to gather that availability from your staff, you don't have to write it in a notebook and it gets lost. And then, their trip that they've been planning for 3 months, you accidentally scheduled them, and it's kind of this awkward situation. All of that stuff gets, easily and digitally collected. If someone does need to change shifts through 7 Shifts, they can do something like that. They can put their shift up for grabs and somebody can claim it, with the manager's approval. So you don't always have to. There's an easy way for managers to see what's going on, and giving people that flexibility. And it also allows managers to integrate with POSs like Square, get that sales information, and make smarter schedules that, make sure people are on when they need to be on. They're making the most that they can. They're not overstaffed, and they're not making as much tips, or they're not, understaffed and they're working too hard and getting burnt out. So there's a lot of ways in which technology can help, and those are just a few of them.
Absolutely. So let's shift the conversation to the customer. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned at Restaurant Stoppable is that it's your job as a restaurateur to first, paint the picture of what the job done right looks like, but then to give your team the tools and technologies to execute and do the job well. So on that note, James, I'm curious, what are you seeing in terms of what's happening on how we can better serve the consumer, the customer?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to, honestly, the first thing, like a labor shortage, not having enough staff. And so how do you still deliver that experience that you want to your guests when it's hard to hold on to staff, it's hard to have enough staff, it's hard to pay everyone enough to keep them around? And, that's where, honestly, a lot of folks have been turning to technology, right? That's been something that started in the pandemic, has gotten better or worse, depending on how you look at it. And, I don't know if folks watching read, there's obviously a lot of discussion about this, but if folks here read the New York Times, Pete Wells, the food critic who, has been writing and working there for 12 years, basically his mic drop for a 12-year career at the New York Times was how technology has been, is giving him the creeps, basically. Like, you can just walk out of a nice restaurant in Manhattan without, even having to drop the check or anything like that. And I feel like it's complex and nuanced topic. Right? It's like, and I talked about this at the beginning, that technology at the table can be a good thing or a really bad thing. If it's helping your staff and it's helping your guests, I think it's a good thing. If it's making what used to be a human experience, and every owner that's on this call, I'm sure you feel that y'all are a part of your community, and it's about those human relationships. And that's partly why people get into the industry in the first place. It can be a good thing. So there's nuance to this, though, right? And we have some data here that, that started to look at how expectations are changing here, that I think will help tease that apart of what is not good and bad, but the nuance, and how do you make those decisions that's right for your service style, your community, your guests, because it's different depending on who you're trying to serve.
Yeah. DJ, did you want to reflect on anything that was shared by James?
No, I think it's important to understand the technology is here to stay when it comes to restaurants, but it's really up to us as consumers, as well as restaurant owners and operators, to decide in which way that we use it. Right? There's a lot of different things available to us, but we have to remember, and I think that's what Pete Wells was trying to get at, in that piece that James mentioned, is we don't want to lose the soul of hospitality to technology, but I do think there's a lot of room for growth. And technology to enable better personal experiences and better experiences for consumers and for staff.
Yeah. And that's one of the big, in terms relative to technology, the big lesson I've learned is that technology is a tool to to automate the less human sides of hospitality so you can focus more on the human sides of hospitality. But also, I don't know, maybe DJ with your podcast too, you probably picked up on this, but when I started my podcast, the whole mission was to crack the code, to find out the secrets, and to figure out what it takes to be successful. And the more I started to dive in, the more I started to realize that there is no secret. There really are no secrets, and there really are no rules. And a lot of the people that get in trouble in the restaurant industry are the ones that are trying to take the 1905 business model, the cookie cutter model, and they go work for successful people, and they just rinse and repeat this way, the right way of doing things. But the reality is, when you break this system, when you challenge the status quo, when you think outside the box and you leverage different business models, that's the secret. And technology can be a great tool to do that, but not, again, at the expense of the human relationships. But I mean, what's going through your minds as I say that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think, like you said, that is the secret, right? It's trying new things. It's daring to be different. It's caring about the people that serve, that work for you, and it's caring about the people that come in the door. The restaurants that are succeeding are the ones that are putting staff experience first, and creating a great environment for people to grow, and then also just become, better people through working for your restaurant, not just better employees of your restaurant. And that seems to be, the defining factor for the restaurants that are doing well, and pushing things forward right now.
Right. James, thoughts?
My honest thought is, I'm thinking back. I went out to lunch a few days ago, and it was middle of the afternoon, kind of a slow period for this restaurant, and they're part of a big restaurant group here in Chicago. They had one server/host working the entire floor, bartender, server, and a line cook. That was it, serving maybe 60 covers. Like, that's insane. A really talented server should be able to do that. But the thing that helped was that she had a handheld ordering device that was able to, when you talk about putting the staff experience first and empathetic scheduling, if you on paper, before we used to have all the QR codes and the handheld ordering stuff. And I know that's not for everyone. Again, you got to look at what your audience is, what your service style is, what the ambiance is. But you have to think about, what are you asking them to do in that moment, right? What is the job? You're asking that person to wear two different hats, cover what used to be 4 sections, and also greet guests and seat them and know what's going on and know where folks are in their meals. I don't think that would have been possible a few years ago without just totally burning somebody out. So,
right. And I think relative to the consumer too, another thing I picked up on is that the consumer, I think a lot of people turn of the pandemic, 2020, everyone was like, it's the end of restaurants. Restaurants are going away, ghost kitchens and all these digital kitchens are going to take over, and it's the end of hospitality. And I think we've seen now that some time has gone by that that's not the case, that, people at the end of the day are still people. They're still human. They still need human connection, and they need to connect with their communities. And that happens in restaurants. But what is happening, what you're seeing, and feel free to disagree, is I think that the marketplace is fragmenting, and there's a lot of different types of consumers. And we today with technology can reach consumers in all different parts of their life, whether they want to have it delivered, whether they want to pick it up, whether they want something cheap and simple, whether they want that high touch Michelin star experience. So I think that there's more opportunity. I think that the industry for a while was kind of I'm either fast casual or quick service or fine dining. And there wasn't that middle ground, that opportunity was just left for the entrepreneurs to capitalize on. And maybe this is a little bit off subject, but this is what happens when I riff. I think it's close enough though.
It's all good.
This is all good. Maybe it's but there's nuance to this. That's what I keep saying. It's there's nuance of who is this all for? Who is this not for? Where are you in the world? What kind of service style are you trying to deliver? What feeling do you want your guests to leave your restaurant with, your cafe, bakery, whatever you got going on? And I think the who you're trying to serve is a big part of this. So these stats are pretty nuts to me. No shade at Gen Z, but 93% of it's not that. I'm a millennial. Yeah, so basically 90% of Gen Z millennials prefer ordering at a kiosk. This was from Square's Future of Commerce study. Big, statistically significant study here. 9 out of 10. That's nuts.
Yeah. I mean, as an old millennial, it kind of scares me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, but I will say, I mean, as somebody who loves to engage people, I love being able to talk to people who work. I choose restaurants for the people that work there. The food could be okay, and if I love the staff, I'm gonna go back. But there is so much opportunity with kiosks too that I don't think people realize. In terms of people are gonna make mistakes. They're not gonna hear the order right. They're gonna miss an opportunity to upsell. But with a kiosk, like, that thing is rigid, and it's going to make sure it's touching all the steps of service in terms of taking the order. So in terms of like being able to increase your per order ticket size and things like this, it's super powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was at a restaurant the other day that had a kiosk, and my wife and I were ordering, and I definitely was tapping and adding on just because it was there, and it was very, it was easy to put together an order. And we had a great experience. Staff was nice, and it was easy to order and pay, and it was a nice lunch. So it's, there's room for hospitality even with kiosks.
Yeah. I hate to admit it. As somebody who like avoids technology at all costs, who rather drive across the country to sit across the table from somebody to have a conversation, I hate to admit that when I use a kiosk, I feel like it's the suggestive selling, the all these things I wouldn't have considered based off the data of what other people purchased with that meal. Like, it's super helpful.
Yeah, it can be. Somebody in the Q&A dropped this question, like, how can you use kiosks and still provide personal touch? It's not for everywhere, right? Like, in fine dining, you're not going to end up, most likely, unless you're in Japan, which we can get into in another thread. But there's a lot of, I think there's a spectrum here, right? Some folks that we see using Square's kiosks are doing kind of a hybrid thing, where you've got a kiosk to the left, a counter at the right. If you've got a line at the counter, more people will go over to the kiosk. So at least you have that choice. That's one way to kind of keep that personal touch, is give people the choice. Are they in a rush trying to like go something on their way on a quick lunch break or something? Or, that's one thing. But I think the other piece with this too is, and I think a lot of technology has gotten better at this over time, but how do you still deliver your level of hospitality, the brand of hospitality, the type of service to your guests through a digital touchpoint? When we were working on kiosk a number of years ago at this point, I was talking to somebody at Collectivo Coffee about this and showed him our kiosk. It was early days beta testing version of it. And he's like, this is all great. It's a kiosk. It works. But like, can I change the language in this to say, step right up? That's a pretty like, it's a very on brand way of saying, start order here. But it's those little moments of like how you train your staff that honestly, I don't know if anyone's really figured out how do you bridge that gap a little bit between like the style of hospitality that you really want to serve to your guests and your digital touch points, right? In many ways, where online ordering has blown up and the DoorDashes and Uber Eats and Grubhubs of the world have kind of become the doorstep to your brand in a lot of ways. When you think about a kiosk, that should be your brand. That should be your experience, and you should have more control over that. Because like whether or not you do it is your call as a business. It obviously can help you, keep your labor costs in line instead of your guests. But this is something that's 90% of most young folks in America, at least, are expecting this in many ways, at least in certain service environments. So it's that tension.
A lot of what I'm seeing too, and similar with the idea of using handhelds to go to the table, and relying more on kiosks, more on online, like picking up and eating in, like you can still have a consumer or a customer facing staff member whose job it is to be warm and welcoming. Just because the kiosk is there to take the order doesn't mean that you can't like love them. Like, you're still in the same room as them. You can still acknowledge them. You can still greet them. You can still ask if they have any questions. You can still ask how their day's going. You can still be a person, but you can just do more with less.
Yeah, my hot take and the counterpoint, again, coming from a guy that works in tech, is that in a weird way, there's, I imagine a lot of the operators and owners on call feel this, but like people get heated about their online orders, right? There are just certain expectations that when DoorDash says it's a 45-minute pickup time and the order got lost, whatever, didn't send, like there's this expectation, I think, sometimes with digital orders, and people also get heated when you're ordering from a server or cashier, but like there's this expectation that because it's all happening digitally and there's this like visual feedback that your order is being prepared, your driver is on its way, that we've grown accustomed to, that you just expect that things work. And you kind of forget that there are humans on the other side of this. You forget that there's somebody that called out today, and like, you can't say that through DoorDash or even Square's online ordering for that. I mean, you can, technically speaking, but like, you know, that you lose this this touch of like, you know, when somebody, you train your servers like, hey, if the kitchen's backed up, you stop at the table when somebody places an order and you say, hey, our kitchen's a little bit backed up. Let me grab you a glass of wine just to tide you guys over. Those types of gestures get lost, I think, sometimes, and just how like specific and accurate technology can feel, when in reality there's maybe just like a line cook who's in the back like swiping a little dial saying, yeah, 45 minutes, sure, when in reality, you never know how bad it is on it. So
I have a bullet point here reminding me to talk about trends. I feel like we've been talking about trends, but are there any final trends that haven't come out of today's conversation?
Any final trends?
I think that there's been a lot of trends shared. I do want to make sure we're not jumping too far ahead in terms of the data.
Espresso martinis. We haven't talked about espresso martinis. I'm ready for those to be over.
Right. DJ, did you want to reflect on anything regarding, we're talking a lot about consumer facing stuff. Any other thoughts that might come back into your head in terms of, what we're seeing with technology and the employee side of things?
Not necessarily technology as much, but just the certain other things that employees are wanting when it comes to those training programs and training people. Maybe it is training people on how to, offer that good hospitality through a kiosk or using the digital tools. We wanted to understand what kind of training people were looking for and what kind of experience they want. So, 70% of employees want that hands-on experience. They want that personal time with a manager, shadowing senior employees, and they want it to be done relatively quickly. I think, we're looking at a 1 to 2 week training period, a little bit more than that, maybe depending on the restaurant, but people want to jump in and start working pretty quickly. So that's just one other thing I wanted to point out when it comes to training and technology. I know that there's a lot of tools out there for digital training and videos and text-based things. And I think there is a place for those in the restaurant world, but they must be augmented with hands-on real experiences, really harkening back to what we're talking about, right? There is technology to be used and make things better, but we can't lose the soul of the industry and what makes hospitality special, which is that, one-to-one human interaction.
Right. And I love that you're talking about training. I did see Sydney's question come in, confession. We're not supposed to be answering these questions to the end, but it's hard for me to ignore the question. They're talking about how do we empower our staff to handle the guest expectation. And, that's not easy, but the answer is 100% training. It's never like the training never ends. Training is a part of your culture. Training is a daily reoccurring surfacing thing. You're constantly empowering them. Where does 7 Shifts and Square come in terms of training and like what tools are available in that regard?
I have some hot takes here.
Go ahead.
I think want to hear. There are like literal training features that you can, when you can create an onboarding kit and take your staff through your SOPs. Arguable how many folks actually still use those at scale, but the thing that I aspire towards, and when we're setting up, like a lot of, honestly, the reason why people choose Square is because you don't need to train your staff on it, right? It's like, okay, if especially given how young a lot of restaurant staff are, depending on what part of the industry you're in, ideally you should be able to like pop this thing open, walk up to it, and you should be able to understand how to like ring something in with a couple mods on it. You should be able to course that and just like kind of understand how it works. So that's obviously one very small part of being successful in your restaurant.
Right. And I think
that should be cool, right?
In a bigger picture, like beyond just Square and like what the greater technology picture looks like, you're looking at machine learning, you're looking at AI, and it's only going to get better because as this technology engages with both your customer and the guest, your employee and the guest, we're constantly it's going to force itself to get better with time. And I think it's important too. I think one of the questions that came through earlier talking about how do you keep that personal touch? And again, as much as I I love human nature, the human element of things. I don't like in terms of facial recognition, logging in, scanning your finger when you get to the kiosk, so the kiosk knows exactly who you are and what your personal preferences are. Like, a computer will be able to remember details about a person better than a person could ever do it if you give it that information, and if you follow the patterns of that person and the habits of that person. Like, where is Square and 7shifts in terms of understanding the both customer and the employee using that data? What's happening in that front? These are questions, or curveballs. So if you guys answer these, I'll be impressed.
I've got maybe two parts to that question. It comes back to like the training piece and kind of how we approach this. Of like, yes, again, I believe there are tools you need for training, but the reality is that, like, I don't know, you're all again talking to all the operators and owners on here. But like, how much time do you really have before you need to put somebody on the line? How much time do you have before you need to put them on the floor where they're like not just like shadowing the server or something like that? Reality is probably before they're ready. And are they going to read all the training docs like at night? Maybe the best ones are, but like not everyone's going to do that. So how do you put that information and that knowledge at their fingertips is something that we think really, really hard about. I'll give you two examples of that. One is this is actually a hack that I was talking to a bartender who used Square, and they basically, when they set up their menu, they put all the tasting notes for different wines as notes on each of the items, and they had basically on cocktails. Right, you're a new bartender, you've got, I don't know, 30 signature cocktails to learn how to make. You're gonna say, yeah, I know how to make that. And then you go back to the point of sale and you start flipping through a recipe book. And like, how do you actually do that stuff in a way that isn't disruptive to the guest experience while you're still trying to get on your feet? And the other one is like, you talked about, how do you aggregate all of these things so that, you're new to this. You're one of the 58% of folks that DJ said that went from one restaurant to another. You don't know who the regulars are. Like, that DJ comes in every Wednesday and sits at that corner booth. But technology can help. Right. So one thing that we did was when we've got a bunch of integrations out with reservation systems like OpenTable, and basically now when you place a reservation, we're able to pull that data actually into the point of sale right in the cart when they're placing that order for you. Obviously, yeah, they're going to still get like the stub with your information on it, but you can literally see right there allergies. Is this person a VIP? What are their most frequently ordered dishes? So that. And you can do that on a handheld too, for what it's worth. So like, you can actually be standing at the table and be like, "Oh, okay, Eric, I know that you love the yeah.
Right."
So, anyways, it's training, but it's also like you don't have time to train people too. So you got to make it come out from both ways.
So in full transparency, and I hate telling this story because I host a restaurant business podcast and I'm supposed to have all the answers and I'm supposed to be like good at everything restaurants. But the truth is, as much as I love people and as good as I can be with people, I went for a job for a popular Mexican restaurant when I was probably 24, 25 years old. And it was a very like, this is the way we do it type of restaurant, like standards of service. At this point, you say this, at this point, you say this, almost scripted. And I don't know, in the short time we've been working together, if you know that I'm not really good on script. So I really struggled working for this restaurant. And the point where I'm trying to go with this is, I think when you can put the script, when you can put the process into the technology, and I think it levels the playing field for your employees, where you might have somebody who brightens up a room, who gives the most F's about the people on the other side of the counter or at that table. But when it comes to their ability to like remember all the ingredients on the menu or remember the step-by-step, like I'm supposed to say, it lets them be themselves. And you can put the standard operating procedures, the steps of service, the rogue memory, the ingredients, all those things you can lean on. This is an example of letting the human shine through and leaning on the technology to do the heavy lifting. And so you can focus on the people, not the details.
Yeah, very much agreed there.
So I think if I came through and this restaurant was using this stuff today, I would have been much more successful with this restaurant group.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's also like, there's so many folks in the industry who have just like grown up using micro solo. Those were just like the only choices you had. They were such unique systems that like, if you were in the industry for 15 years, you know how to use it. Like, for folks watching, probably everyone here has used a micro solo point of sale at some point. And the reality is that they were like this mind mapping of what it was like to enter an order. But I think where we've gotten to where you've got folks who've never worked in a restaurant before coming into the industry now. And, how do you set it up for them that like you have, if there's a certain way that you want your orders to be taken, right? Like how do you order your modifiers basically, right? Like when you're asking for somebody to take an order, you can actually do that kind of through the point of sale. Like, all right, you want a burger? Okay, how would you like that cooked? Like you can actually make that a bit more conversational for your staff as well, if you've got the right technology to do that, right? That's part of it. So it's not just about like this rote entry of, mash a bunch of buttons and hopefully get to what you want. It's literally this guided process of making sure that anyone coming into this thing can use it really quickly.
Right. Are there any ideas, thoughts, trends that haven't come to the surface yet? Now is the time to get it out. All right. Well, I think now we shift to Q&A. So just as a note to our attendees, the Q&A is open. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the Q&A box to the right of your screen. And as those come in, we'll answer. Do we have any fresh ones? I think some of these questions we kind of were touching on as we were going.
I think we've got one in the chat here, though.
Go for it.
Yeah. So, do you want me to? Then.
Go for it.
So, if I'm struggling with making money as a restaurant, though, how do I start to change my margins? Right. Those prime costs, earn more in order to offer my team things like benefits, training, and help keep them staying with us. Right. That's the reality, right? If they're leaving because of low pay and your margins are already under a ton of pressure, what do you do? Right.
I'm going to read the question because I don't know if I think there was an echo that kind of made it hard to hear you. So I'm just going to read it real quick. If I'm struggling with making money as a restaurant, though, how do I start to change my margins, earn more in order to offer my team things like benefits, training, and help keep them staying with us? So basically, how do you squeeze more out of the lemon is what I'm hearing from that question. How do you get the most specific? I mean, I have answers, but specific to Square and 7 Shifts, what goes through your mind, James and JD?
I mean, I think this industry has such thin margins, right? It's about finding efficiencies wherever you can. And I think technology can be a huge help with that, whether it's saving small percentages of labor costs by scheduling more efficiently based on your sales, or understanding where the upsell opportunities are, with a handheld or POS and having that kiosk data. It's really just about looking and seeing where you can find those small things that add up, because, someone, for example, punching in 15 minutes early a few times a week over the course of a few months, can really skew your labor costs. Something we found, and a big reason why our tools have able to help people save on labor costs, be able to enforce things like that, early punch-ins, late clockouts, and things of that nature. So, and it's not just about that; it's also about just making sure you have the right amount of people at the right times, so you're not stressing people out, forcing them to be less efficient, and bringing in less sales per labor hour, or the inverse, where you have too many people and you're diluting, you're paying too many people for the amount of time, for the amount of guests that you have. So I think it's finding efficiencies, especially on the labor side of things. But I think maybe, James, you could speak to, on the POS side of things.
Yeah, this is a hard question. I feel like probably every owner is asking themselves this, even the ones who are making a ton of money. Yeah. Here's the simple answer, but it's not simple, is service charges. That's what a lot of folks in the industry are doing. They're charging that hospitality fee. They're charging that, hey, this and that message that you put on your website, or you drop it on the receipt. The reality is that there's backlash to that, right? There's the folks who are saying that there are petitions. There are folks who will refuse, and then you're dealing with like having angry guests in your restaurant all of a sudden, which is another reason that your staff might leave. So is that the right way to go? Maybe it is for the market that you're in, maybe it isn't. That's the most direct route. Pay money for these things, pay for these things. But I actually think there's a more nuanced answer to this question. And this is something we talk a lot. Oftentimes, when I'm talking to restaurant owners, I ask them, what is success look like to you? And also I ask them, how do you know if you're making money or not? And way more often than not, even the most savvy owners are like, yeah, well, there's money in the bank. I can make payroll that week. I can pay my suppliers. But I think the first step here to like, how do you change your margins? It starts by knowing your margins. And a lot of people have ballpark of like, well, I make pretty good money on the fries. But this is kind of a loss leader for me. But actually having, of your, and it's hard to do that. I talk to so many different operators and the struggles there, but like, can you understand your margins where it matters most? So like your 10, 15 most profitable items, get those in control and get those in line first. So at least in terms of the volume that you're doing, are you actually making money? But then how do you actually earn more, right? And there's, again, easier said than done with everything that I'm saying here, but something we talk a lot about at Square and that I firmly believe in working, trying to help folks in this industry is helping restaurants drive profitable demand to your business. It's easy to sign up. They're all easy answers. You offer a surcharge, or you go on DoorDash and you elevate your prices by 30%, which they don't encourage, but that's the nuanced conversation. But how do you bring in new orders that you make money on? Right. So you often do that through your own online ordering website. Maybe do that through a kiosk. And then how do you keep them coming back? That's honestly the biggest thing is like, can you have good margins on every single order that you get in? So again, easier said than done. Folks are always looking at ways to build their relationships with their guests. But those are kind of the couple of ways that I've seen folks do that is you get your margins really, really under wraps. You figure out ways to drive demand, ideally through like marketing, through loyalty programs, but then bring those orders in ways that you are actually making profit on it. So at the end, end of the day, you can actually afford not just, to pay more as a base hourly pay than the restaurant down the block, but also offer better benefits, more time for training, things like that.
Yeah. I think too, it's a lot of mindset. I think when we think of growth, we think of outward energy, like a tree growing out, getting bigger, growing more, trying to do more. When the reality is growth can be going in the opposite direction. It can be just personal growth, like self-awareness growth, business awareness growth. What are we good at? What can we shed? What can we focus on? How can we do one thing better than anybody else? And putting all of your energy into doing more with less, and to own just being self-aware of knowing what you're good at. And also I would say growth can be, how can we do what we're already doing better? So that means our system, it's the discipline to do the things that nobody wants to do. And it's creating habit and routine and ritual around those things so that it becomes first nature. And the way you do that is by leveraging technology, because technology can be a checklist for the owner. If you're using the tools that are given to you and you just go through like Square and 7 Shifts, they're going to give you the tools, and those tools are your business owner checklist. Use the tools. You can invest in the software and the hardware, but unless you're swinging the hammer, it's not going to work for you. So you have to use the tools and go through the motions to the point where it's gonna suck in the beginning. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be boring stuff that you did not get into the restaurant industry for. It's going to be budgeting. It's going to be purchasing. It's going to be costing. It's going to be recipe management. It's going to be training. It's going to be checklists. It's going to be like all these systems that will make your head spin. But when you use the technology and you use the technology as a standard, then there is only one clear way to do it right every time. And it will become routine and ritual and habit with time. And then you can pass those routines, rituals, and habits off to your staff. So use the tools to the fullest ability is what I would say. And that will kind of steer you in the direction of what you need, like how to go in the direction you need to go to be profitable.
Can I ladder on to that, Eric?
Yeah.
Before we move on. The one other piece that I didn't mention here was just like, and we talked a little about kiosks, and they're one example of this, or the handheld QR codes. There's all these different levers that you can experiment with, and hopefully in ways that don't cost you an arm and a leg, right? It's, if you're going to move all to like handheld ordering, yeah, you need to get 10 handheld devices, and that's $3,000 if you don't want to spend right now, probably. But could you, if you're a quick service style place, could you experiment with a kiosk? One of the things that we really thought hard about when we launched Square's kiosk was it's literally actually the same hardware that you use for your point of sale. So something that we've actually seen some cafes and bakeries doing is they'll actually have 2 points of sale up if they have 2 cashiers on staff to run those. But actually, maybe that's only, if you're a bakery, that's probably from like 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and a weekends thing. But let's say you're open the rest of the afternoon, maybe you only have one cashier and one kiosk then. So you can literally flip the screen around, open up your kiosk, and all of a sudden now you're able to cut one staff. You're protecting your labor costs and hopefully actually bringing in more tips for the staff that are working that day. So again, that's a harder shift to do, but like I think where I've seen folks be successful with this is really the owners who are willing to experiment with things and try it for 2 weeks. Again, hopefully in ways that are low cost to you and your business, that you can try something out, see if kiosk helps, see if a KDS helps, see if handheld ordering helps. But again, I got to respect, like, I'm the guy that works in tech. So, like, when I talk to a lot of owners, they're just like, no, I don't want people taking orders to the table. That is not the ambiance that I'm trying to create. I want people engaging with the guests. And I believe that that's going to get in the way of that interaction. So you have to find the ways that work best for you and for your staff and don't feel intrusive. And at the end of the day, make you more money and make your staff more money. So it has to be a win-win for everyone, or otherwise, it's just making the day-to-day harder.
DJ, any thoughts before we move to the next question?
Not on this particular topic, but there are definitely some questions that I'd love to address.
Yeah, pick one. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one I see here, do you have any advice on what I can do now to help with keeping my team engaged? My restaurant is growing and it's difficult to stay connected on how happy or frustrated the team are and to communicate shift changes. So, this I think is a big one when it comes to team communication. And that's something that we're trying to accomplish here at 7 Shifts. So, things like team chat are ways, and that's what we try and do is provide tools for people to easily be able to communicate when they're not there. It is hard when you're in a restaurant, right? You're always running around. It's hard to understand where people are. So something that we do have is a shift rating system. So when someone's done with their shift, they're able to go through the 7 Shifts app and just put, how was your shift? Rate it kind of on an emoji scale if they want, and add comments, shift was great today, made a lot of tips, or shift was great. Everything was smooth, or maybe the shift was terrible, the fridge broke. And that's something that managers can view and make comments on and reach out to folks that maybe are frustrated. There's also other ways to do that without technology. To this simple way, there's a chef out in Sacramento. His name's Pat Mulvaney, and he pioneered this way of doing things. It's just a suggestion box, right? There's a different color, and people can kind of rate the shift, and they drop in their thoughts at the end of their shift. My shift was great. My shift, how are you doing? And just understanding that way in a more analog sense. So if you're not ready to jump into tech, it may just be something as simple as a shift rating, sheet, something people can add to, but just give people a forum to do so. And it's not busy because, someone may be clocking out, they have somewhere to go. Manager's busy taking people. They're not really going to have time to say, how was the shift today? Like, sit down. So just acknowledging that, yes, it is busy, but there are ways to gather feedback in indirect and analog or digital way.
Yeah, I interviewed Mike Ganino, a name you probably might be familiar with. He's pretty well known in the space. And he said, he asked me the question, Eric, what's the one number that most restaurant owners aren't tracking? And it was exactly that. How happy are your staff? And that's a question that you can make you can automate that question. You can automate bringing that question to top of service every day when somebody checks out. But before they can actually clock out through the system, on a scale from 1 to 5, I'm not sure what your scale system is, but like, was it a 5 or 1? If it's anything less than a 5, your managers can get notified and you can address that issue in that moment. So I think the answer is first seek to understand. If you want to understand, if you want to make sure your staff is engaged, like make sure you give them an outlet to tell you when they're not. Listen, pay attention. Get the information. James, did you have thoughts?
No, just that I want that for like my design team at Square. Honestly, like that's one of the biggest things is like, how do you give people the right spaces? And in a restaurant, schedules are all over the place, right? You got people coming and going, you've got people opening, closing, etc. When do you have a time to like really sit down? And I love that like both of those examples, both the analog one of like the suggestion box and the digital one, both of them are about like in that moment where your staff might have a second to like check in, finding the right ways to do that, again, digitally or analog.
Yeah. There's a question here. How do we attract more staff when it feels like we're in a time where it's so hard to hire? I feel like that question might have came in during the conversation. I think we might have answered it like indirectly, but do we want to resurface that real quick?
Yeah, we can jump into that real quick. There's some stats I did not get a chance to get into that we asked when it comes to. I mean, there's a lot of the things that we did in our survey. I'll kind of point to that. How can we attract staff? It's advertising that we have flexible schedules. It's that schedule with empathy, explaining to people that there is flexibility. But if we can scroll back here, I think I can access here. Benefits is another big one. A lot of restaurants don't offer any sort of vacation days, PTO. That's a huge one that people are looking for. They're looking for those traditional kind of benefits you get with a 9 to 5. So looking into different ways that you may be able to offer some form of health insurance or retirement savings plans is one. Just looking at those benefits and understanding what you offer. I mean, paid time. The other two are complicated, especially for restaurants, but paid time off. Even giving people a week or two of vacation, closing the restaurant for a week in the summer to give people some time off is a huge one. And that's a big thing that staff are looking for when it comes to benefits. And health insurance doesn't always have to be the traditional sense. Working as an employer, there are options. There's a company called Oyster Sunday that we chatted with for the survey, and they do ways to offer health benefits to staff for a very low cost. So there are resources out there for restaurants to be able to provide employees with these kinds of things. So that's one big one. But the simple ones are that flexibility, career pathing, things like that don't end up costing restaurants on the bottom line.
Right. I mean, I have a thought. I don't know. It might be a controversial thought. I think we are moving in a direction where, as restaurant owners, we just need to learn how to do more with less. And I think we have in our mind this picture of what a restaurant is supposed to be, how it's supposed to work. We've taken this way of running restaurants that we have learned through our 30, 20 years of working in restaurants, what our mentors were doing, the way they ran their restaurants, and we take that cookie cutter approach and we try to do it in an age where there are so many tools, technologies, and resources that we can lean on to literally do more with less. You don't need to lean on an employee with experience anymore, because there's literally step-by-step processes that you can put somebody who's so green through, and they know like there'll be a learning curve, but they are given the tool. Like, we can give our team so many more tools, and we can literally, I hate to say replace team, but like for certain things that we just don't need a human to do anymore, we can literally, or have one person do more because we're giving them the tools to do it, and we don't have to rely on their experience and skill set. I think that's super important to keep in mind, that we can literally do more with less.
I think there's a question here that maybe touches on that of like, what is the learning curve like to bring in technology, like the handheld device for ordering or kiosk or a platform for scheduling? And I think that there's, to your point, Eric, of like, how do you move to this sort of like new way, and how do you experiment? I think it's just that, though. You have to experiment with it, right? A lot of places I'll see where, there's one of my favorite restaurants and bars in New York, is a place called Finelli Cafe. I grew up down the block from there, and anyway, love those guys. But, they, before any change, they'll kind of set it up on one point of sale or one device in, the back office. They'll have their staff come through with it, and then they'll put one out on the floor. And then they'll have maybe their like most veteran server walk through it, find the holes, as opposed to just like rolling it out over the heap. Can be a lot. So it's like the way that I suggest that is actually like start small, make smaller investments, use the things you have. Like if you've got an iPad laying around, that's honestly when I talk to a lot of chefs on using a KDS or kitchen display system. Those have really blown up honestly in the last like 3 or 4 years. And they just started because they had an iPad laying around. They downloaded the Square KDS app. They're like, oh, this is kind of nice. Then turned out that their staff really liked it, and it saved them a ton of paper, saved them a ton of effort, and kept things more organized. So it's like, start small is how I'd advise, like, because that learning curve is there. I don't want to diminish that, but often start small. It's like just one KDS, one handheld device, one kiosk, and then you can figure out how that works into your service style and what doesn't work.
I think of James Clear, Atomic Habits, this idea of like systems and processes. These things eventually become habit. You have people who've been working for you for 5 years. They still have to do the checklist, but they're not referencing that checklist as they're going through. They're doing everything they have to do, and then they go through and they verify out the checklist. Eventually, if you reinforce the systems and the technology, and you just keep that constant gentle pressure on your employees to go through the motions, to use the tools, eventually that resistance goes away, and what feels like work, what feels like a learning curve, just becomes nature, because you have a set way to do it the same every time. JD?
Yeah, absolutely.
DJ? Have I been saying JD this whole time?
All good. I think it's forming those habits, and it's just making sure that, you're always kind of looking at things. And I've talked to restaurateurs about, enforcing core values before, and they're just like, every day is effectively day one. You have to keep enforcing these things and keep reminding folks why we do things the way we do things. And, that's just part of the business, right? It's just constantly reinforcing the proper way to do things. And making sure that, if things are being done correctly, you don't make them habits, like you mentioned.
Awesome. I think that wraps everything up. And if I have been saying JD the whole time, I apologize. DJ.
All good. DJ.
My bad. Okay, so closing, we are going to wrap up our discussion. So I think that's it for today. Thank you for joining us, and it's been great. Thank you guys so much for including me. Let me be a part of this as well.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, and thanks to the folks for tuning in. I know an hour out of your day as an owner operator is a lot. There's a lot going on. So hopefully there was something in this conversation today that was helpful for you as you're thinking about what to do next and face some of the challenges that the industry is facing. So yeah, thanks for the time.
Thanks again for checking out this episode of The Pre-Shift. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review and rating and share it with one of your friends to help the show grow. Also, be sure to subscribe to our Food Runner newsletter. Once a month, you'll get a roundup of resources, practical tips, and industry leader insights to learn more quickly. Sign up at 7shifts.com/foodrunner. Check the link in the description. Until next time.